Nuclear hazardous waste disposal is one of the most contentious concerns in U.S. waste management policy. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act, passed by Congress in 1982, mandated the U.S. Department of Energy to construct deep geological storage for high-level radioactive waste by 1998. Congress revised the legislation in 1987 to suggest Yucca Mountain, Nevada, as the location for this national nuclear repository. Years of delays, however, have pushed the 1998 deadline by more than 20 years. The facility is not anticipated to open in the near future, if at all. The federal government has set aside $44 billion in funding for the construction of a permanent nuclear waste disposal site in the United States, and it began collecting money from energy customers for the fund in the 1980s, and it now earns approximately $1.4 billion in interest each year. However, state and federal politics killed plans to create a site in Yucca Mountain, Nevada, and there has been a lack of political will to find other solutions. As a result, the United States lacks the infrastructure to dispose of radioactive nuclear waste in a deep geologic repository, where it can gradually lose its radioactivity over thousands of years without causing harm. However, as the implications of climate change become clearer, investors and some political activists are rekindling their interest in nuclear energy as a source of energy that does not release climate-warming carbon dioxide. This forces supporters to address the vexing issue of waste once more. So if the funds are available, and the problem that this project addresses is vital, why hasn't it been implemented yet? The repository. The Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Repository is a proposed deep geological repository storage facility within Yucca Mountain for spent nuclear fuel and other high-level radioactive waste in the United States, as authorized by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act amendments of 1987. The site is located in Nye County, Nevada, about 130 kilometers northwest of the Las Vegas Valley, on federal land adjacent to the Nevada test site. Spent nuclear fuel is a radioactive byproduct of commercial nuclear power plant electricity generation, while high-level radioactive waste is a byproduct of reprocessing spent fuel to make fissile material for nuclear weapons. Congress adopted a national program to address the issue of nuclear waste disposal in 1982. This policy is a federal statute known as the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which made the U.S. Department of Energy, DOE, responsible for locating, constructing, and administering a geologic repository. The National Academy of Sciences stated in 1957 that the best option to protect the environment and public health and safety is to dispose of waste in rock far down. The DOE began researching Yucca Mountain in 1978 to see if it would be suitable for the nation's first long-term geologic repository for over 70,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste stored at 121 sites across the country. As of 2015, the waste from America's military nuclear operations is estimated to be 10,000 metric tons. Based on nearly 10 years of data, the DOE chose 10 locations in 6 states for consideration as potential repository sites on December 19, 1984. The 10 sites were examined, and the early findings were published in 1985. President Ronald Reagan designated 3 sites for intensive scientific research, known as site characterization based on these studies. Hanford, Washington, Deaf Smith County, Texas, and Yucca Mountain were the 3 locations. Congress revised the Nuclear Waste Policy Act in 1987, directing the DOE to research only Yucca Mountain, which is next to the former nuclear test site. The act stated that if Yucca Mountain was proven to be inappropriate during site characterization, studies would be halted immediately. When Reagan actually suggested the site, this option expired. President George W. Bush signed House Joint Resolution 87 on July 23, 2002, allowing the DOE to take the next step in developing safe storage for nuclear waste. By January 31, 1998, the DOE was supposed to start receiving spent fuel at the Yucca Mountain repository. The Yucca Mountain project's goal is to comply with the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982 by creating a national repository for spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste. USA Repository Services, a wholly owned subsidiary of URS Corporation, is the project's management and operating contractor as of April 1, 2009, with supporting principal subcontractors Shaw Corporation and Arriva Federal Services, LLC. Following the layoff of 800 employees on March 31, 2009, approximately 100 personnel remained on the project until the end of 2010, when all technical staff were laid off due to zero funding in the 2011 budget for the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management. Sandia National Laboratories was in charge of post-closure analysis and guaranteeing NWPA compliance. The exploratory studies facility's main tunnel is U-shaped, 8.0 kilometers long, 7.6 m wide. Aside from the main tunnel, there are other cathedral-like alcoves. The majority of the scientific experiments were carried out in these alcoves. The emplacement drifts where waste would have been kept was not built because they required Nuclear Regulatory Commission approval. It would have taken 64 kilometers of tunnels to hold that much garbage. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act further restricts the repository's capacity to 63,000 metric tons of initial heavy metal and commercial spent fuel. If spent fuel rods are not recycled, the 104 commercial reactors in the United States would have produced this amount of spent fuel by 2014. So why does such a critical project face so much backlash? Opposition. By January 31, 1998, 25 years ago, the DOE planned to begin receiving spent fuel at the Yucca Mountain repository. Years after the deadline, the future status of the Yucca Mountain repository was still undetermined due to continuous litigation and resistance from Harry Reid. Due to construction delays, a number of nuclear power facilities in the United States have resorted to indefinite dry cask storage of waste in steel and concrete casks on site. The proposal is widely opposed in Nevada and is a contentious national issue. A two-thirds majority of Nevadans believe it is unjust for their state to be required to store nuclear waste, since Nevada has no nuclear power plants. Many Nevadans were opposed because of the so-called Screw Nevada Bill, legislation passed in 1987 that halted research of Hanford in Texas as potential destinations for the waste before conclusions could be reached. Nye County, which contains the proposed facility, as well as 6 neighboring counties, favor the repository's establishment. According to a 2015 survey of Nevadans, 55% agreed that the state should be open to discussing what benefits could be received. The standard of radiation emission in 10,000 to 1 million years has been a source of concern. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, proposed a limit of 350 millirems per year for that period on August 9, 2005. In October 2007, the DOE released a draft of the Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement, indicating that the mean public dose would be 0.24 mrm year for the first 10,000 years and 0.98 mrm year thereafter, both of which are significantly lower than the proposed EPA limit. A hip X-ray has a dose of roughly 83 mrm, while a CT head or chest scan has a dose of around 1,110 mrm. An individual's annual exposure from background radiation in the United States is approximately 350 mrm, while some areas receive more than twice that amount. On February 12, 2002, Secretary of Energy Spencer Abraham determined that this location was appropriate for the nation's nuclear repository. Nevada's governor had 90 days to object, which he did, but Congress overruled his opposition. If the governor's opposition had been upheld, the project would have been scrapped and a new location sought. Senator John Kerry announced in August 2004 that if elected, he would scrap the repository plans. The Obama administration attempted to close the Yucca Mountain facility beginning in 2009, despite existing U.S. law designating Yucca Mountain as the nation's nuclear waste depository. The DOE, an administration agency, began implementing the president's plan in May 2009. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission agreed with the administration's closure plan as well. Several state and federal groups attempted, both legally and in court, to contest the administration's closing plans. In August 2013, a U.S. Court of Appeals judgment instructed the NRC and the Obama administration to approve or reject DOE's application for the never-completed waste storage site at Nevada's Yucca Mountain. They cannot simply plan to close it in contravention of U.S. law. In a Senate hearing on March 5, 2009, Energy Secretary Stephen Chu reiterated that the Yucca Mountain site was no longer considered a possibility for storing reactor waste. On March 3, 2010, the DOE filed a move with the NRC to withdraw its license application, but various lawsuits have been filed around the country to oppose this action as being illegal under the NWPA. The costly nuclear disaster at New Mexico's waste isolation pilot plant in 2014, in which a nuclear waste container burst, has cast doubt on its suitability as an alternative to Yucca. Governor Steve Sisolak pledged in January 2019 that not 1 ounce of nuclear waste would be allowed at Yucca Mountain, and a May financing package did not include money for the site. The Reno Gazette-Journal published a long-form essay in May 2019 chronicling objections to the Yucca Mountain project. The Western Shoshone regards Yucca Mountain as sacred, and a nuclear storage site will poison everything, according to a tribal elder. It's the life of humans, our Mother Earth, all the living things here, all the critters. Whatever's crawling around, it's also their life. The tribes believe they lack the resources to refute government safety claims, but they will be directly impacted by a potential tragedy. The state of Washington filed a lawsuit on April 13, 2010, to delay the closure of Yucca Mountain, which would slow efforts to clean up the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. South Carolina, Aiken County, the site of the Savannah River, and other states joined Washington. The complaint was dismissed by the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit in July 2011, stating that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had not ruled on the withdrawal of the licensing application. On July 29th, Washington and South Carolina filed a new complaint. After receiving $32 billion from power companies to fund the project and spending $12 billion to investigate and develop it, the federal government had $27 billion remaining, including interest. Senator Lindsey Graham sponsored legislation in March 2012 requiring 3/4 of the money to be returned to customers and the remaining to firms for storage improvements. The United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia directed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in August 2013 to approve or reject DOE's application for the never-completed waste storage site at Nevada's Yucca Mountain. The NRC was simply flouting the law in its prior decision to allow the Obama administration to continue efforts to dismantle the proposed waste site because federal legislation designating Yucca Mountain as the nation's nuclear waste repository remained in place, according to the court opinion. According to the court's decision, the president may not decline to follow a statutory mandate or prohibition simply because of policy objections. In response, the NRC published the final volumes of the Yucca Mountain Safety Evaluation Report, SER, which included a statement from NRC officials that the facility would fulfill all applicable criteria. At the same time, the staff argued that the NRC should not approve the repository's construction until the conditions for land and water rights were met, and a supplement to DOE's Environmental Impact Statement, EIS, was completed. On March 3, 2015, the NRC directed staff to finish the supplemental EIS and make the Yucca Mountain licensing document database public, utilizing all of the already granted licensing money. So where is the Yucca Mountain project today? Today, the DOE discontinued deep borehole and other non-Yucca Mountain waste disposal research programs under President Donald Trump. The DOE requested $120 million from Congress in FY18, while the NRC asked $30 million to continue licensing activities for the Yucca Mountain repository. The DOE proposed $120 million for FY19, but the NRC boosted its proposal to $47.7 million. Congress voted not to fund the remainder of fiscal year 2018. Representative John Shimkus presented a bill for the site in May 2019, however. An amendment by Representative Mike Simpson to add $74 million in Yucca Mountain money to a DOE appropriations bill was defeated by the Appropriations Committee. Under Secretary of Energy, Mark W. Menezes stated before the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee on May 20, 2020, that Trump strongly opposes proceeding with the Yucca Mountain repository. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm stated in May 2021 that Yucca Mountain will not be included in the Biden administration's plans for nuclear waste disposal. If you think this project was a failure, well, at least they didn't spend any money. Click the link on the screen to see Myanmar built an entirely new capital for it to become a ghost town.